welcome people to come along to our future events. We try and do one every month. And also we're going to have our spring school in 2024 is going to be on project management and AI. And that's how AI is helping project managers, and also how project managers are helping AI. So we're looking at it from both sides, and our chief executive is going to come along to the panel evening on the fourth of the sessions. Now that's going to be on the 9th, 16th, 23rd and 30th of April. So please come along to those if you can. Over to Gary. We've had a few chats about this session, and he's a real expert on transformational change. And rabbits for cats, not sure where he got that from. I'm sure he'll explain that to us. It's to do with magic, I suspect. And his presentation is going to have an iceberg in it. And only a few days ago, they announced the release of a massive iceberg twice the size of Greater London. And eventually it's going to be nibbled away. Really like a project, you nibble away at what's going to happen. Eventually you come up with a solution. In the case of a real iceberg, the solution is just water. Anyway, without any further ado, Gary, I'll hand over to you. Oh, by the way, Gary's written a book, at least one book. Copies will be available for purchase later on, and a few copies scattered around. And I'm sure he'll sign one for you, rather nicely.
If you want it to like scribbled on, I'm more than happy to do that, yes.
Anyway, over to you, Gary.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Right, if I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, how do I do that? So we had, those of you in the room, we did have some interesting challenges. Oh gosh, what's happened? Am I still sharing? Am I stopped sharing?
I can see a blank screen online.
Right, how do I get to just see me?
This is an IT problem. Yes.
It was very complicated. Okay. So when I want to share, I just share and screen so brilliant. Okay. Okay, right. Thanks, David, and hello, everybody. My name is Gary Burke, and I'm a transformational change advisor and consultant. And I work with organisations to help them understand and manage change, particularly transformational change, which I'm sure many of you have come across. Organisations, they're not always that great at it. It's transformation, digital transformation, whatever flavour of transformation we're talking about. Yeah, they could be better. Actually, can everybody hear me online? Am I online okay? Everybody hear me online?
Yeah, we could hear you, Gary.
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Okay, so and I've worked in the change and transformation space since the mid-90s, although I actually started my career as a student actuary, but don't hold that against me. I've worked in a lot of sectors, obviously lots of insurance, but also utilities, retail banking, telecoms, companies, consultancies, software houses, multinational, smaller companies, companies scaling up, a variety of project, program, management, director roles, and head of change. So I've seen things from pretty much all sides of the fence. And I'm going to talk about transformational change, sort of change needed to bring about a transformation rather than just a bit of an improvement or a change here or there. But what I've found to be useful in helping companies and leadership teams, particularly, who don't necessarily have a huge amount of experience with this stuff, look at transformation in a different way and be more aware of what needs to be considered so that ultimately they make better decisions and they don't end up leading the board meeting some months after the transformation program started, where they need to discuss possibly the huge amount of money that's been spent, the lack of progress, and how to get the project back on track. And as project and program managers, some of the things that you can use to help those in those leadership positions, maybe business stakeholders and other people in the program project teams understand this transformation stuff a bit better. Because all of the tools needed to get this stuff right are in any PM's toolkit. They just need to be sometimes used in perhaps slightly different situations and perhaps more complex situations. So whether you're running the show or managing a small part of a larger program, you can make a huge difference by just doing what you do well and reminding people why some things really shouldn't be ignored. And so I'm not going to be talking for the whole time. There are going to be a couple of breakout sessions as we go through and some polls to kick things off. So if you've got your phones out, that'll be good because I'll be using Slido. Slido.com. There will be a QR code to scan as well. So we'll see that in a minute or two. Also, feel free to submit questions as we go through and I'll answer them at appropriate times. And there will be, of course, Q&A at the end. But I'd like to kick things off with a poll. So hopefully. Oh, I need to share my screen. Right. Where do I go? Sweet. Okay, so hopefully you can now see the PowerPoint presentation, those of you online. That doesn't seem to be working. I think that must be still right. Okay. Can everybody online see that?
Yep.
The poll. Okay, fine. So really just want to get a sense of who's in the audience, who's in the room, who's out there. So what I'd like you to do is if you scan the QR code or go to slido.com and put in that number, you should get that question and just choose the role that most appropriately fits you. Give it 30 seconds for people to answer that. I was wondering how many others we were going to get. Start on that in a minute. Okay, so just give it another like 20 seconds or so. Okay, last 10 seconds. Again, it's just to get a sense of who's in the audience. And so unsurprisingly, we've got a lot of project program change managers and analysts, managerial people. Others, any others in the room? Just so, what's the other?
I'm a lawyer in a technology company, so I get involved in projects and a lot of them are transformation. And so I'm just trying to get a bit more of an understanding.
Okay, so transformation, transformational change, it is complex and it's a bit like an iceberg, as they mentioned earlier. And there's a lot that isn't necessarily immediately visible that needs to be understood and considered to avoid ending up with the transformation project equivalent of the Titanic. It's something that many businesses, large and small, they really struggle to do well. So the next poll, very simply, is have you been involved in some way, shape or form in a transformation project or transformation program? And hopefully it should have updated the question on your screen. And this might have been involvement in a major way or a small way, but just some involvement in some way, shape or form. And again, we'll just give that 30 seconds. Actually, probably not that quite that long. Very simple question. Okay, marvelous. And okay, we're going to move on from that. So everybody pretty much has been involved in some way, shape or form. So the final poll is I'd like for people who have been involved in a transformation project, which is all of you, what's your experience been? What percentage would you say of the ones that you have been involved in, what percentage would you say have been successful? And there's a few options there, 4 options, well, 5 options. Just from your perspective, however you viewed it at the time.
Depends on what you how you define success.
Oh, you're stealing the thunder.
And if that includes having a program for remediation options.
Hard to say, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's a lot hard to say. So, okay, it's like pretty much pretty equal there, apart from the less than 25%, which is, well, does anybody have any kind of comments or thoughts or comments about the results that we see here, or indeed the question?
Yeah, I think people kind of look at transformation as something that they need to do, but they don't really know what that destination looks like. And so it's really difficult to say whether it's a success or not.
Yeah, and as sorry, I don't know your name, but yeah, how are we defining success here? What does that mean? It's a bit of, frankly, it's a bit of a meaningless question because unless we've got a measure of what success looks like, how can we say? And also, I'd say that you have all those transformation initiatives that you've been involved in. Have they all been really transformational? Okay, before we look at any sort of change, I just want to spend a minute talking about lunch. You weren't expecting that, were you? Now, when I said lunch, you all know what I mean. It's that time in the middle of the day when you take a break, maybe have something to eat. So we're all on the same page. But where are we? Because your understanding of lunch will change depending on the situation. During the week, it might be a sandwich at your desk. If you're in the office. If you're in home, it might be, I don't know, bite to eat in front of the telly. Or if you're going to lunch with somebody, you might go to a cafe, a restaurant, a pub. You certainly won't be sharing a sandwich over a desk. Or if you are, please never invite me to lunch. When is it? Is it in the middle of the day, midday, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock? How long does it last? A few minutes, half an hour, an hour? There's lots of possibilities when I talk about lunch, but as it's a concept everyone's familiar with, it's easy to know when you can talk about it in a general sense or when you need to be specific. Now, transformational change is not such a familiar concept. It's woollier, it's more ethereal. So it's harder to distinguish between talking in a general sense and talking in a specific sense. And just the point I want to make is just to be aware sometimes of the clunkiness of language and how it's used. So when you're talking about transformation, then just be aware that you're talking and what your interpretation of it is, and other people, if they're talking about it, may be very, very different from yours.
Brendan online is saying that Officer Horizon was a transformation success.
Gosh, what to say on that one? Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that it wasn't. Obviously, yeah, I don't know what you can say that hasn't been said about that already. But no, I think that's firmly falls into the bucket of not being successful. Okay, so before we look at transformational change specifically, just want to sort of talk about change more generally. Now, one of the few things everyone can be sure of, individuals and businesses, that things will change. And by changing something, you either start to do something new, do an existing thing differently, or stop doing something. There's always a driver, a reason for making the change. And the point of changing anything is to bring about a different and better outcome in some way, whatever way that may be. In our personal lives, moving home, that's a big change. It's a major investment. There's a big impact on our current situation, the status quo. There's lots of things to do, lots of parties involved. and it can be a stressful time. Has anybody moved recently? Did anybody move last year, move home last year? No. Well, I'm sure you have moved in the past, and it can be a stressful time, but you'll be looking forward to the outcome by living in the new home. And there's an important point here, and that's to recognise that there's two distinct components to any change. It's like a coin, there's two sides. You can't have a one-sided coin. Firstly, there's the outcome of change. Secondly, there's the things that need to be done to get to that outcome. Now, it's often said that people can be resistant to change, which is true to a point, but in many cases, the outcomes should be welcomed. But businesses, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, don't make a very good job of explaining the outcomes and the benefits so that people understand why things need to change, and engaging and involving the people who need to be involved in making the changes, and those will be impacted by the outcomes, the recipients of change, the people who will have to live with those outcomes. So people aren't necessarily resistant to the outcomes of change. They just don't like those outcomes being forced on them, change being done to them. So when you change, engage, involve the people who need to be involved, and change with them. And transformation is often described as a journey, as I'm sure many of you have heard before, and you have to take people with you on that journey. Okay, so for any change we make, certainly for any transformation that we make, there'll be a current state and there'll be a future state we want to get to. Those are outcomes that we want. Now, to get to those outcomes, you need to go through a period of change where we transition from the current state to the future state. Well, that future state doesn't just kind of kick in. It doesn't start operating perfectly as soon as the changes have finished being made. There'll be a period of adaptation where business, its people, possibly customers too, need to adapt to the new way of working, the new way of operating, until those changes become embedded and they become the new norm. Going back to the moving home example, once you complete the purchase and you get the keys, then you can't just pick up from where you left off from living in your previous place. You've got to unpack all the boxes for a start, but there'll be a period where you need to get used to living in the new place. All cupboard things are now kept in. The new route to school. The kids will need to adapt to settle in to the new school, assuming they've moved to school. A period of adaptation's needed for things to become the new normal. And it's the same with transformation or any change. You need to get used to the new thing. And of course, change is nothing new, and businesses have always had to adapt to it. But the rate and pace of change now is unprecedented. There's an onslaught of change from multiple directions. New technology, AI, escape that. Increasing regulation, higher customer expectations, data, cybersecurity, and the never-ending pressure on revenues and costs. How we manage change and how we deal with it depends on the impact the change will have and the complexity of making that change. So very small changes where there's minimal impact and they're very simple, they may be made as part of the day-to-day BAU, business as usual activity, which is fine, but you need to be aware of obviously unintended consequences. I did some work for a small company, about 130 people, helping them introduce new technology and new ways of working. Initially, they had no way, they didn't manage change. Changes were made by teams as they saw fit, always, of course, with best intentions, but unsurprisingly, it caused problems. In one instance, somebody made a seemingly inconsequential change to a page on their website. What actually happened was it started stripping out attachments that customers had sent in on emails. So once this was discovered, so obviously the person making the change, it was untested, it wasn't documented, they didn't tell anybody. So once this was identified, it had to be fixed. the customers impacted had to be identified, contacted, apologised to, resend the information. It was messy and completely avoidable. So very small change, fine, but you need to be aware of those unintended consequences and have at least appropriate controls so that that sort of stuff doesn't happen. For larger change, where you need some structure, visibility and control, you might manage it through a project. For larger, more strategic change still, it might be a program of work. And for change that's genuinely transformational, it might be a transformation program. At this point, I'd like to break for the first breakout session. And I don't know how many people we've got online.
26 at the moment.
26, right. Do I need to do this or do I need to do this? That's right, great. Right, the question is, I'd just like you to think about what makes transformation transformation? How does it differ from change? And if you can, we could hopefully going to put you into certainly people online, rooms of half a dozen or so. We're just going to give you 5 minutes to think about what are those aspects, what are those ideally words that make transformation transformation? How does it differentiate from change? And when we come back, we'll see how you got. So hopefully, 5 minutes, yeah. So you've got 5 minutes once we're there. I have no idea. How are we doing? Are we there?
I know, if I put them into the breakout room, they won't be able to hear the briefing like we do.
Oh no, fine. Right. I'll
We'll start the clock now if you want.
yeah, and then you'll come back to the main room.
Suggestion is that we try and do the same as well. Get a few groups together.
So in little groups, just have some like chats. What are the key things that you think differentiate transformation from change? Slido number. If you scan that, it should take you to a page where you can just put in. But if you put in sort of like 2 or 3 words that resonate most with you, in terms of what are those things are that make transformation transformation. So if you think, I don't know, if you think transformation is blue, then yeah, put in blue, and hopefully we should see a word cloud. I've got no idea how this is going to work because I haven't done this before, so you're all guinea pigs. But if you just type in and submit the words that resonate most with you about what makes transformation, well, at least we know it's working. Fine. So the 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 words that resonate most with you about what makes transformation, how's it differentiated from just normal change? We'll give us another 30 seconds or so to give you a chance to get your words in. Okay, final 10 seconds, last chance to get a final word in. And okay. Right, okay, so lots of different words, but impact, scale, complexity, cultural shift, mindset change. Okay, this you can see kind of certain themes developing there. So transformation, it means different things to different people. And a lot of stuff over the years has been called transformation when it hasn't really, it's just been change. That's non-transformational change. Transformational change, of course, it's still change. It's just much more complex, more things to do, more parties involved, and a much greater impact on the current situation, which we can see the words there. It's where what and how things are done can potentially be reimagined, not necessarily in a revolutionary way, but just being open to the possibility of doing things differently. And of course, there's more opportunities for it to go wrong. It's that iceberg which you really want to avoid. Now, I describe transformation. Okay, I describe transformation as, that's the other presentation, as a step change in operation and performance to deliver different and better outcomes. So it's not about changing a bit here or a bit there, it's that step change. Those changes have a significant impact on the organization's business model and operating model. So potentially reimagining what and how things are done. But I think a lot of the problems with transformation programs, transformation projects start with the problems we see here, because these three terms, transformation, business model, and operating model, aren't really understood as well as they need to be. So what's involved with transformational change can easily be underestimated and the wrong approach taken. And then some months later, you're having the board meeting where you need to, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I mentioned earlier, the transformation is often talked about as being a journey. But when we say that, what do we actually mean? What's involved? Well, with any journey, as with any journey, there's a destination, start point, and a route. The destination is simply described by the organization's vision. Its purpose, why it ultimately exists, what it ultimately wants to achieve. And its mission is, again, at a high level, how it's going to achieve its vision. And just to bring this to life a little bit, I want to look at a real life example. IKEA, everyone's familiar with IKEA, the furnishing, Swedish furnishing company. Its vision, its purpose, why it ultimately exists, is to create a better everyday life for the many people. Obviously, IKEA is a global company, so many people of the world. And how, well, given what IKEA does, its mission, how it's going to achieve this is to offer a wide range of well-designed, functional home furnishing products at prices so low that as many people as possible will be able to afford them. Bit of a mouthful, but those two statements, succinctly described kind of the point of IKEA. Now, for any organization to realize its vision, it will need to achieve certain objectives, and these will be defined by an organization's strategic goals. And those goals, obviously, they'll be shaped by the vision, but they'll be influenced by external factors, regulation, competition, technology, etc., as well as the prevailing economic, societal, political landscapes. Now, to achieve its strategic goals, an organization needs to do its thing, conduct its business, whatever that may be. And what it does is described by its business model. It's how organizations create value. And it just describes what products and services an organization offers, the customers, different customer segments that are its markets, and how those customers, how each of those segments is served. But business models don't and can't exist on their own. IKEA, Mercedes, Tesco's, Lloyds Bank. They don't exist to hire staff or produce annual accounts or manage processes or buy ink for printers. That's not the point of their existence, but they need to do all these things and countless more to create the environment that enables them to conduct their core business. And it's the operating model that describes this environment. And the operating model, well, that's how the organization is structured. It's the leadership ethos and styles, the culture that pervades the organization, governance, corporate appetites, people, roles, the skills they have, the processes employed, data, how that's used, as well as all the technology aspects, the applications, networks, and infrastructure. It's about how all these components work and work together, and they apply to everything that any organisation does, all the functions across the business. Now, to fully achieve its strategic goals, an organisation needs to operate perfectly, so it could perfectly execute its business model. And this perfect operating state is described by the target operating model, which we see here. But it's just that, it's a target, it's something to aim for. As it will never actually be realised, as the factors that impact strategy, and hence the business model and the target operating model, will change faster than an organisation can adapt to them. So these factors here, the regulation, competition, economic landscapes, they will all change quicker than an organisation can adapt to them. So that's the destination, the North Star, the thing that sets direction is the business model and the target operating model. Now, the start point for any certain transformation journey is defined by the current business model and current operating model. And it's basically how all these components work and work together across all the functions of the organisation now. It's how they work and work together now. Now, regardless of the size of the business, it might be a 2-person, 20, 200, 20,000 or more business. All of this still applies. But it will do so with differing degrees of formality and visibility. Small businesses, startups, and often businesses scaling up will be very focused on their business model, acquiring new customers, selling products and services. The other stuff on the operating model side, it just happens. It gets done when it's needed. It might not be formally defined or visible, but it's all there. I did some work for a company that had grown from a couple of dozen people to a couple of hundred in a very short period of time. And they were actually very successful. And they focused their focus was very much on selling products, services, acquiring new customers, selling new business. And they did it very well. But what they failed to understand or appreciate was they also needed to scale their operating model, their operating environment to support the increase in business, which they didn't do. So they ended up in a complete mess, huge backlogs of items, and it took them a long time and a lot of money to actually address that and get that into shape. And larger businesses as well, although they may be more aware of their operating model and have teams to do the IT and the HR stuff, they may not necessarily have the experience and the holistic perspective that's needed for transformational change. Now, the route for any transformation journey is defined by the change roadmap. We're familiar with that, the strategic and tactical initiatives that an organisation needs to undertake to move it from its current state towards its target state. And it's the organisation's change capability, internal resources, often supplemented by external resources, third parties, consultancies, vendors, solution providers that will undertake those initiatives. Now, understanding the current operating model is something that companies, they don't do that very well either. But it is essential, certainly for any transformational activity. And I just want to emphasize the importance of that by considering an actual journey. If we believe we're in London, we want to go to Scotland. Who wouldn't? We want to go to Scotland. That's the outcome we want. That's our strategic goal. We might plan this route to Edinburgh. But en route, we might get some information which means actually we want to go to Glasgow instead, which is fine. Because as long as we know that the outcome we want is being in Scotland, we don't even need to know the detail of our final destination. Because we can change direction en route with minimal. But if we weren't in London at all, if we were actually in Plymouth, then that route that we need to take is very, very different. Because if we take the route that we were going to take had we been in London, it's not going to get us to Scotland. It's going to get us, well, it's going to get us quite wet quite quickly. And in project terms, that's a different plan. The approach will be different. The assumptions, the priorities, our focus will be different. And even companies that do define try to define their current operating model sometimes focus much too much on process, which, as we saw from the previous slide, is just one factor of many which comprises the operating model. And processes are often mapped to far too detailed a level to be maintainable, so provide little real value. Now, detail, of course, it's important. The devil is always in the detail, but it's important to know when it's material to what you're trying to do. And when you're defining the current operating model, certainly initially, the detail is not important. It's the current operating model is more about how the organization hangs together, the interaction of the different functions and components. An analogy. If I want to go to the station to catch a train and it's raining, I might call a taxi so I don't get wet. Now, I don't need to know whether it's an EV or a hybrid or the capacity of the battery or the colour of the car or when the MOT is due. These are details that are not material. They don't affect me being able to achieve my outcome of getting to the station without getting wet. Now, of course, if there's any doubt that basic expectations aren't going to be met, then they need to be clarified to minimise or eliminate any ambiguity. I mean, you wouldn't want this taxi turning up, would you? Well, you may do, but I wouldn't. So another example, if I asked you to identify this image, you would all be able to tell me, hopefully, that it's the Mona Lisa. Even though we've got pieces missing, we don't have all the detail. But that doesn't matter because your objective is just to tell me what it is. If your objective was to complete the puzzle, you wouldn't be able to do that because then you do need the detail. So just be aware of when the detail is important to the objective you're trying to achieve. And yes.
So going back to that, is it important to realise what you're trying to communicate and who you're communicating to kind of give you that appropriate level? So are you going to be showing a C-suite guy really detailed swim lane models of your process, or an abstraction of that says we've identified these pain points and this is why we're going forward?
I think very much the latter would probably resonate more because, I mean, when was the last time you were talking to anybody in a really senior position who had the time of day and really cared about the detail? So it will resonate more. And there's simplifying complex stuff is quite tricky, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. So understanding the current operating model it's actually more important than it's ever been because operating models are fragmented. Companies have been outsourcing functions for decades, but now they're outsourcing functions and parts of processes, integrating with third parties and third-party services more than ever. APIs, data enrichment, ability ecosystems. The once simple operating environment, denoted by this rather simple jigsaw puzzle, is now much more complex. And it's more important than ever to understand how it all fits together so that you can continue to see the bigger picture. And if you understand how it all fits together, you'll be more operationally resilient because you'll understand what parts of the business can be impacted when things change. And if you know this, then you also have greater organizational agility and be able to react to change much more swiftly and with greater confidence. So understanding the current operating model is essential. What you do now, the problems you've really got, and what needs to be addressed to achieve those different and better outcomes. In transforming a business, there may be minimal impact on some components and functions, but the key thing to be aware of is that they're all connected and can't be looked at in isolation. You can't assume there'll be no impact. That's sometimes quite hard to do because each of us looks at things slightly differently. for our own individually tinted spectacles, if you like. And the tint on our lenses is, well, it's a mix of our training, our education, our upbringing, how we're wired, and a whole host of other things. But the key thing to be aware of is that what you see and what I see aren't always the same. There are lots of commonality, of course, but certainly when we're presented with things that we don't do very often or have no experience of, we'll have our different views on the approach to take, the risks involved in doing something, or our appetite for doing it. Now, in business, people's careers are often forged in function verticals. COO, operations director will have likely to have come up through an operations route. A CIO or CTO is likely to have come up through a technology route. You get the idea. CFO, finance, marketing, etc. They'll come up through those particular routes. When presented with things outside of their experience, they'll inevitably look at it through their lens, through that technology, operations, finance lens. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just how it is. With transformation, any sort of transformational change, there may not be a cross-functional, horizontal, holistic perspective, that transformation lens that's needed to genuinely understand the impact that the change will have across all functions of the organization. And it's the leadership team that will make all those big decisions at the very outset of any sort of transformation regarding strategy and direction and prioritization and investment. And that holistic perspective is essential so that any consequent transformation program is approached in the right way, with all those key decisions being informed decisions made with as much understanding and information as possible. And I want to sort of break up the second breakout session. Yeah. And there's a scenario I'd like you to just think about. The organization that you're working for is going to embark on some transformation program. And they just want to see whether they are in a good state to actually do that. Are they prepared enough to do that? And you've got the opportunity to ask the executive sponsor a couple of questions. So I'd just like you to spend 5 minutes thinking about what are those questions that you would ask the exec sponsor to see whether the organization was in an okay place to start. And then say 5 minutes back into breakout rooms. When we're back in the room, we'll just go through and just get a couple of questions from a few rooms and the room here. Right, just want to go a couple of questions. Who wants to give a question that they'd want to ask the exec sponsor?
Why are you doing it?
Can you afford it?
Okay, can you afford it while you're doing it? Online, anybody wants to offer a question? Or people want to offer questions? What's what you thought came up with? Anybody?
We actually had one that sort of spoke to, do we have the commitment from the board to deliver this information?
Yeah, good question. Okay, thank you, everybody. So there's lots of questions that you could and should ask. I mean, if I had 3 questions, they'd be. They would be.
The old way.
These. There you go. Again, and I'm sure these questions when I came up in your discussions. Can you clearly articulate the outcomes you want? What is it you actually want to achieve? What do you want the organization to look like after you've done all this transformation stuff? And if that can be clearly articulated, succinctly, not in a war and peace going around the houses kind of way, but succinctly, then I'd ask, why do you want to achieve them? What are the problems you're actually solving by doing this stuff? Don't forget, we're asking the executive sponsor. The third question that I'd ask them, and this is my favorite, is if I asked your leadership team colleagues the same 2 questions, would they give me the same answers? Because for any transformation where many parts of the company are going to be impacted, it's essential, it's absolutely essential that the leadership team is aligned. Maybe they won't agree with everything, but collective board responsibility, they at least need to be on the same. Because if that leadership team isn't aligned, then you're going to really struggle. Well, you're not going to get the buy-in and commitment on the lower levels of the organization. So if the organization is in a good place to start, how do we make this step change? How do we get from our current state to our future state? Because the transformation of the business will come about by making lots of coordinated, orchestrated changes across multiple areas to produce those different, better outcomes. And this is usually best done as incrementally as possible, breaking sensibly the change down into small chunks of change rather than doing everything in one go. And if the transformation program particularly is approached and structured and managed well, you should be able to lower risk and start realizing benefits sooner rather than later. So incrementally is the way to go. And a good example of incremental transformation is, I know many of you probably heard this before, but British Cycling. Back in 2003, I can't believe it's more than 20 years ago now, British Cycling was in a pretty poor state. They'd won 1 gold medal at the Olympic Games since 1908. And actually one of the top bike manufacturers in Europe refused to sell bikes to the British team because they thought it might damage sales. So British Cycling hired this chap called Dave Brailsford as their performance director, and he introduced this strategy of marginal gains, whereby they looked at everything that was involved in riding a bike. The idea being if you could improve by a small margin every little thing, like 1% or more, the accumulation of all these changes would make a big difference. And they looked at things that you might expect from a professional cycling team. They looked at diet and exercise regime, and they looked at redesigning bits of equipment. Well, they looked at absolutely everything. They even hired a surgeon to teach the riders how to wash their hands to minimize the chance of catching a cold. And as all the changes, hundreds and hundreds of changes came together, the transformation performance was, it was transformational. At the Olympic Games in 2008, the team won 60% of all the gold medals available. They topped the tables again in 2012, 2016, and I think they also topped the tables at the World Championships last year in Glasgow. So the changes were sustained. Now, this transformation didn't change what they did, it didn't change their business model. It was still competitive cycling, but it massively changed how they did it and the outcomes they achieved, and crucially involved that change of mindset, being open and willing to look at things differently, which is a key factor for any certainly transformation. So if you want to transform the business along with that shift in mindset, you need to envision that future state, what you want the business to look like, how you want it to operate, as well as having a sound understanding of your current operating model, as that gives you a solid foundation for transformation for any change. I mean, you wouldn't buy a house that didn't have solid foundations. So why would you embark on a strategically important program of change, transformation program without one? But many organizations do. I'm sure you've heard that it's said multiple times that 70% of transformation programs fail. Well, that's a myth. It's not true. There's no empirical evidence to support that statement. But the number of initiatives that don't deliver what they should, what is expected of them, is too high. Companies don't help themselves in a lot of cases. Rewards drive bad behaviors. The bonus of a CEO or CIO might be dependent on a system going live on a particular date. So it does. They get their bonus. And then the company spends the next 3, 6 months, 9, whatever, sorting out the mess that's been caused by putting this thing live too early, that hasn't been properly tested, or it hasn't been adopted by the business. Lessons aren't learned from past experiences. Mistakes are repeated. Bad practice is repeated. And what's sometimes forgotten or ignored are the solid project management principles that underpin any change. Now, I'm not talking about project management as just the technical and process stuff. It's the whole thing. Managing change or a project or a program, a transformation program, it changes stuff. That's the point. And it has to include both sides of that change coin. The stuff that needs to be done, the project stuff, and being able to cope and deal with the outcomes of change. Embedding the changes into that BAU environment. And the basics are critically important. They don't just apply to transformational change, they apply to any type of change. And companies ignore them at their peril. Unfortunately, they sometimes do, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. Now, I don't intend to teach you how to suck eggs, so I'm just going to whip through these quite quickly. But in no particular order, the basics, from my perspective, again, these certainly apply to transformation. Excuse me. You need to understand what you want to do and why you want to do it. We're talking about the outcomes, not the solutions. You need to be realistic. Don't jump on bandwagons. Just because some company over there is doing something is not a good reason for you to do it. It absolutely might be the right thing to do, but them doing it over there is not a good reason. You need to understand the scope of what you're doing, regardless of the methodology, whether it's a waterfall, agile, hybrid, or something else. The scope needs to be understood to a sufficient degree, because if you don't know what the scope of the thing is, you won't know what needs changing or what the impact of the change is going to be. I'm sure we've all experienced scope creep. So controlling that, managing the project program with an effective change control process, good solid project management, good solid stakeholder management is crucial. You need business and benefits cases just to make sure that the thing you're doing is actually viable. And costs and benefits need to be included, both tangible ones and intangible. It's all about getting buy-in, certainly at the executive level. You need to get buy-in across the organization and identify and engage stakeholders, recognizing that there will be different stakeholder groups and they will have different aspects that are important to them. So you need to identify what's in it for them, for each stakeholder group, and engage with them as early as possible. Understand customer needs. What problems have they really got? That the customers really got, not the ones that the company thinks they've got. And there is a difference. And if you know who's involved and how they're impacted, then communicate to them. Keep them appropriately informed. Not forgetting that communication is two-way, so you have to have feedback mechanisms as well. So certainly beneath transformation, you will be working with third parties, maybe external solution providers, consultancies. Don't be overly reliant on them. Don't devolve accountability for the success of the project to a third party. It's your, have contracts in place and read them before you sign them so that you can define. So what any third party is doing is defined, certainly as defined as possible, because that will prevent the client's potential exploitation. And of course, with solution providers, we're selling systems, functionality, we need to be mindful and ask the right questions to understand what's smoke and mirrors and vaporware as opposed to stuff that really exists. And more importantly, I think probably than a lot of stuff, companies are very keen to engage third parties, so they do so far too early. And there's a lot of stuff that organizations can do themselves to put themselves in a much better position from a risk and a cost point of view before engaging third parties. People need to know who's doing what. I mean, that's basic, isn't it? Program methodology needs to be understood. Don't shoehorn activities into particular methodologies. Not everything is best done in agile sprints. So just use the tools and techniques that are appropriate to the task at hand. Governance. Governance does not mean red tape. Effective governance means everyone knows how the program operates. Reporting, change control, decision-making, escalation. Reporting is important, obviously, to make sure people understand what's going on, what the status of things is, and to assess the ongoing viability of the thing you're doing. And of course, there is no prize, despite what some companies do, for the biggest reporting pack. Information needs to be meaningful and relevant. Have a plan. Obviously, at the project level, it can be quite detailed. Plans at high levels at the program level don't need to be as detailed, otherwise they will be unmanageable. Leadership and direction needs to be clear and focused, but certainly for the larger stuff, it needs to be flexible too, because there will be lots of assumptions initially and lots of stuff you just don't know how you're going to do it. You might know the outcome, but you won't know how. So it needs to be, that flexibility needs to be there. And the sponsor role, that executive sponsor role, is often performed by someone who has no idea of what that really means. So that's just something to be aware of. So they may need coaching and mentoring. And again, just realistically appraise the capability internally and see whether you really have the skills and experience internally to do what you need to do. And if you don't, go external, but always with caution. So will adhering to these points guarantee your success? Of course it won't. But if you don't do the basics, then you pretty much, well, you're going to give yourself a very hard time and it may even end up failing. But transformation, so the big stuff, digital business transformation, is often perceived to be like this. It's a smooth road meandering off into the hills and the sunset, but it's really much more like this. It's a dangerous path that's hard to navigate and quite treacherous in places. And this stuff can go wrong, and quite spectacularly. We're all familiar with Lidl, the supermarket giant. They spent 7 years and over 500 million euros, over €500 million on a program to transform their back office operations. They're actually implementing SAP, an SAP product. But the way SAP works and the way the SAP products worked didn't quite, well, they didn't gel. So essentially, Lidl, to all intents and purposes, wanted to re-architect how SAP worked. Right, that's ever going to work. I mean, it was subsequently described using the analogy of a prefabricated house. Hopefully, some people know what that is. And it was said that you can move the shelves around, that's fine. But once you start moving the walls, it loses its structural stability. So with spiraling costs and increasingly unstable solution and lack of progress, they cancelled the program. €500 million. Smaller companies too can get this stuff really wrong. I know a company that thought it needed to change its core administration system. So they went out, bought one, signed a 5-year contract. The only problem was that they didn't really understand what their current operation was. They were very siloed, communication was awful, fragmented processes, dysfunction all over the place. So they didn't understand their real issues and they didn't have a clear idea of what good looked like. So they bought the wrong product. And they tied in this 5-year deal because they didn't really understand the contract they signed either. So they're tied into this, which doesn't allow them to move their business forwards. Now, both of these examples, they were meant to transform how these businesses worked, but they just ended up not achieving that and being very, very costly. Now, no one sets out to fail, of course, but why does it continue to happen? I mean, we saw earlier about not having that cross-functional perspective, that transformation lens, but why isn't that lack of perspective recognised? Well, to answer that, does anybody go mountain climbing? That might seem a bit odd. We got one. Anybody go mountain climbing online? I guess most of you probably don't. But if
Yes, I do.
That's fine. Okay. But most of you don't. Hopefully most of you don't. But if I was describing mountain climbing to you, I might use this image to give you the gist of what it's about. We have a mountain and we kind of want to get to the top. Kind of mountain climbing. But you'd know that wasn't the actual route a climber would take. The actual route being, I don't know, it might look something like this. With transformation, organisations, this is the bit, right, that's the actual route a climber might take. So it's a simple concept to grasp. Even though most of you don't go mountain climbing, it's a simple concept to grasp. So it's easy to form that kind of mental picture and distinguish between the gist, the left-hand side, and reality, the right-hand side. With transformation, organisations don't do it that often, so there's limited experience. And with the complexity involved, it's much harder to get an accurate mental picture of what's involved. The transformational change, the complex stuff, can be substituted with non-transformational change, the easier stuff, the straight arrow, the smooth road. And hence what's involved can be underestimated. So it's approached in the wrong way, set off in the wrong direction. As an example of substitution bias, it's when, well, say when something that's really hard to grasp is substituted with something that kind of seems similar, but it's a lot easier. There's been lots of case studies over the years where transformation programs, digital transformation programs don't succeed. And the reasons typically given include, well, there's a poster, and there's probably sort of 15 or so, which are commonly trotted out time and time again. But we've known about these for years, and we have. Why do they keep happening? It's because these reasons, they're actually really symptoms. The actual reasons, the root causes, I think there's only really two. The first root cause why this stuff doesn't do it is simply a lack of understanding of what's involved and the impact it will have. If you're starting out on a, say, transformation program of some sort, you will have, when I say you, the leadership team, the senior leadership team will have an initial understanding of what's involved and the impact it will have. And that will align to the appetite that they have and that the organisation can support. And from this alignment, expectations will develop around benefits, costs and timescales. Now, once you've been going for a few months and you realise actually there's more to it, you have a problem because that's not what you have appetite for. So do you increase your appetite and the associated costs, or do you rein in what you wanted to achieve? Either way, it's going to have a negative impact on your business case. And that's it. It's simply not having a sufficient understanding and setting off in the wrong direction. The second root cause relates to not having the appropriate capability to deliver this stuff. And there's actually two aspects to this. And the first is experience and expertise. Again, your initial understanding, you will engage the capability that you think can deliver in line with that understanding. But when you realise there's more to it, do you have a capability gap? Do those internal and external resources that you've got on the pitch, do they have the experience and expertise needed to do what you need them to do? An analogy. Who enjoys entertaining and cooking for friends? Having friends round, knocking up a bowl of chili and all having a lovely time. I imagine a fair few of you. So the prospect of having a handful of friends around the weekend doesn't faze you. But if I said, actually, it's not a handful of friends, it's 100 people and I'd like you to do a 10-course banquet, it's still cooking and entertaining. But you'd realise, hopefully, that there's a different level of skills and experience needed to do the banquet. And transformational change is a bit like the banquet. And if you approach it like cooking for friends, it's not really going to end up as you want it to. Now, the second aspect relating to motive, relating to capability, relates to motive. Now, let's assume you do have the correct understanding of what's involved, and you have engaged the capability, the third parties that can help you do this. You would want everybody to share your objectives. Your objectives being to deliver your project as cost effectively as possible, realizing benefits at the earliest opportunity. Whereas some third parties, some consultancy solution providers may not always be acting in your best interests. They may be more interested in generating as much revenue as possible, which would be great for their revenue stream, but again, not so good for your business case. And of course, some consultancies, solution providers will generally have your best interests at heart. The tricky bit is knowing which one's which. So to be successful in this stuff, certainly transformational change, you need to make sure you do have the correct understanding and it aligns to your appetite for it, recognizing that there will be challenges and hard decisions to make along the way, and your capability to deliver. Transformation, but it's not something you do. It's not something you do. But when you do, you want to get it right because there's too much at stake in terms of reputation and cost. And I just want to finish with a closing thought. So this stuff is complex, but it doesn't have to be that hard if it's sufficiently understood and approached in the right way. Because let's face it, anything is hard if you don't have the right skills, tools, experience, and mindset. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of that. So it's a little bit of time for Q&A. Oh, so just one thing before Q&A. David mentioned earlier, if you think it's interesting in any way, shape or form, I do have a book available on Amazon called A Transformation Lens. So please feel free to purchase one, I suppose. And let me know what you think of it if you read it. Questions? Yes.
You mentioned a few cases of small organizations, their projects of transformation, but in big companies, there's an element of politics between teams and departments and levels of hierarchy.
Yeah.
How does that fit in transformational projects, the aspect of politics?
It's a problem, is the short answer. It's a problem. I mean, there's got to be the alignment and the desire to actually want to do this stuff. And if you've got internal politics and internal fighting, then you can do as whatever you want, but it's going to be hard to really make any changes unless those differences can be understood and worked out. So, I mean, the thing to do is try to understand what those differences are, why they exist, whether people will actually engage and want to do that or not. It's a different question. It's a bit like leading the horse to water. You can take it to the water and go, here it is. You can't make it drink. And if the horse doesn't want to drink, sometimes there's not really much you can do about it. So, yeah.
There is a reluctance to understand the as is state, and there's quite a lot more focus on the understanding the to be. So there's people are more focused towards to be understanding the to be state.
Yep.
What needs to be done, and over the current state. So how would you address that? How would you get people, the senior leadership team and the people on the ground level, to understand the current state?
I use analogies a lot. So talking to a senior team about, you have to understand your current operating model. They're going to glaze over, go to sleep, check their phone. I use stories, like the analogies, like the journey, as I just mentioned, and just to try to bring the point to life about, look, this is what we're talking about here. And why would you not apply this? Really just try to get them to think a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think the issue that I found behind no reluctance towards no understanding the current state is that they're overconfident about that they have the picture in their head, the collective.
Yeah, which is fine, but they're probably wrong. So it means it needs to be validated, but validating it doesn't mean you have to do this big nth degree process mapping thing. That's not the point. So it's the interaction of functions, components at high level, and that can be done relatively quite simply. And it's them understanding that.
I've done exactly that. So instead of going into real detail over process, put together some kind of design thinking diagrams and swim lanes, put them together. And what that does by using kind of, icons to represent systems and just having some high level pain points and emojis in, can really give them that understanding of where those problems are without going, oh, this is another dumb, boring IT diagram. You know, so you say they've got a picture, give them a picture to replace that, they can immediately at a glance go, ah, got it.
Yeah, it's got to be that at a glance stuff, that easily digestible information without having to wade through, a 50-page slide deck or something. Yeah.
But I think it's a good idea, isn't it, for everyone to have a common understanding of where we sit at the moment.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
and what the issues are with that. So
Yeah.
everyone has a common understanding of where they need to go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one, but then we'll see if we've got anybody online after one.
Reinforce point about the icons, etc. Someone was saying, CEOs and C-suite are not stupid people, otherwise they wouldn't be up there.
Mostly.
So they do understand, we just need to
Yeah.
get that, what you were
Exactly.
saying.
Absolutely, just, I haven't got time.
We will
to be
get it in
digging
a second if it's
Exactly,
delivered right.
yeah.
Which is why sort of trying to come at it from a slightly different, a non-technical, non-project angle is sometimes a good thing, just to go to get them to that little thing to drop into place and they go, oh yeah, if I think about it like that, then of course we need to understand that. Does anybody have online, any questions online?
Whilst you're waiting for that,
Yes.
maybe I could add to the point you made and your reaction. I've seen in 42 years of business that often people are actually promoted to the level of incompetence.
Yes, it's a fact of life, unfortunately. But when you recognise that and know who those people are, then you need to address those in the most appropriate way.
And a lot of them are voted into.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
The solution is they get golden parachutes.
yeah, that's one way. Yes, sorry.
Just that there used to be a thing called soft systems methodology. Don't know if anyone's ever come across that. And that started with a rich picture with, the sort of
Absolutely.
shows kind of a holistic view.
And that's really important. That's like, one page. I mean, if you can, you can represent the organisation, any organisation on a page, you can. And then the next level down, maybe sort of like, 2 or 3 pages. And then you down here, you go down to the next level. But you need to have that pictorial one pager, that contextual representation. It's really, really powerful.
Those context diagrams I find really.
Does the org chart really serve that purpose?
Sorry?
Does the org chart serve that purpose?
It was.
Not enough, like, is the org chart enough to serve that kind of purpose?
Organizational charts.
I'm looking at
Exactly.
interaction between systems,
and
people, external organizations. You don't have to worry about what methodology and what diagrammatical methodology representation is about. Here's a picture. And I look at that and say, I recognize my organization and I can see.
And a lot of it is just kind of like getting the gist. Okay, and to basically kind of giving people enough information so that they can at least start to have a sensible conversation about stuff. Otherwise, they just.
Sorry, I think Geraldine is waiting to talk.
Yeah, Geraldine.
I have a question. It's how can you help people to do this kind of initial assessment? So in my case, I work for a third-party system provider. So I arrive to implement a system. And when I dig, I realize most of my customers don't know their current process. And I was told it's not my job to dig in that. So how can I help them to do the job before they contact us?
There's so much of this is about just kind of educating people and, again, what companies can and should do themselves before they engage you. But as you said, a lot of companies just don't. They don't understand this stuff. I think all you can do from a third-party point of view is point out the fact that having something like this would be really helpful. Explain kind of like what it is, why, and then, you flagged it, you've done your bits. If the organization then wants to sort of kind of, doesn't want to bother, then fine, they'll go down their road and then they'll realize, 6 months later that actually they should have done that because they've got the problems, whatever problems they've got, they've created. It's a tricky one, but I think all you can do is try to educate your clients.
I think if you're a professional supplier, it's beholden on you to do that actually. Apart from covering your own butt, it's in their interest as well. So I think perhaps we should be more forceful as a supplier, not just just roll over and take the money.
I've seen that catch that often before. I've seen somebody given the contract, but what they soon appreciate is the board's already decided what they want to do. But you've been brought in to show there was a process and legitimize that decision.
Sometimes the clients are overconfident that they know all the details and they know the big picture, but then when you say that you wanna, as I was reiterating my point that I made before, that you want to define that as a state. And they said, we already know it, why do we want to do it? I think, and it's not part of your remit to do it, or there's a reluctance, there's resistance for an organization to understand
There is, and I would approach that by not redoing the whole thing, but just suggesting, okay, I'm sure you're right, but it would be good just to validate that. And you can do the top level validation, because all you need to do is find one thing which doesn't fit and you go, so is this going to be problematic? Because then it causes doubt. So it's really, just a pragmatic approach.
But even if you give a high level view of the current issues and the current organization operating model, there's a reluctance to.
Yeah.
They're not ready to transform, are they?
They're not ready. Yeah, there's a resistance to transformations. That's one.
There is, and so much of this comes down to, candidly, poor leadership. I mean, certainly with transformational stuff, it's a big deal. I mean, it's going to fundamentally change how the organization kind of like functions and performs for years to come. So they should care. And if you've got kind of experts saying, oh, actually, we need to kind of like, understand this, or make sure this is a kind of like a solid place, we've got a solid understanding of where we're starting from, then, if they, poo-poo that and say, just do this, then, is the leadership really where it needs to be? And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, the answer is no. People manage, they don't really lead.
Can I sort of draw it to a close now? Because those of us who are present here today, there's some food and drink next door, and you can carry on talking to Gary. He's still going to be around.
Well timed.
If I can make a final observation. In your basics list, the last one in the chat was evaluate capability, and that means the capability of the supplier as well as the
absolutely,
client, isn't it? And an ability to estimate the scope of work. We've got an example right at the moment in public Horizon project where they totally underestimated the scale of the job, and the buyers of the system probably didn't understand what they were getting into anyway. So that's a lesson across the board for everybody, isn't it?
Absolutely, and just things will go wrong. So you've just, you've got to kind of fess up to stuff. And if you balls it up, then you need to correct it. You can't cover it up. Otherwise, well, post office Horizon.
What I missed on the chart was also legal compliance, because I think back to when Marks and Spencer's decided they were going to close their store in Paris. They announced it, and then they were told by the French government, you don't do things that way in France. You've got to create a works council with representatives of the workforce, with ministers. You've got to go through a 6-month process before you come to that conclusion.
You want to change something, you need to understand the impact,
Yes.
and then deal with whatever those consequences are, not just assume we'll do this because it might work, but it's probably best to check.
Yes.
Gary, can I thank you very much for.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Remind everybody that a copy of the slides and the recording will be available as soon as the BCS team can put it together, and it'll be available through our. So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, everybody online. And I've enjoyed, and good night.